The Tata Steel Chess Tournament is approaching its end. Today was round 12 and a lot of things happened. There were some blunders, there were amazing games being played, and we're going to take a look at a couple of games that really intrigued me the most, and they were so exciting to watch. Before we get started, let me know down below in the comments who you think is going to win the Tata Steel Chess Tournament 2023. Let's take a look at this game between Jordan van Foreest and Giri. They are both also from the Netherlands, and I was super excited for this game. Slightly concerned that it may just end in a pretty simple draw, but the players went for the fight. They smelled blood and it was insane. Let's take a look. Jordan opened with d4, knight f6 was played, c4, e6, knight f3 and d5. This is simple queen's gambit. C takes d5, e takes d5, knight c3 and bishop b4. And this is called the Rogozing defense. Bishop f4, knight e4, rook c1, knight c6. And here Jordan goes for the move h4, which looks a little bit odd because, well, the king hasn't really castled to the king side just yet. So what attack are you trying to prepare here with the move h4? But he has something in mind. Bishop f5 was played, e3, and here comes knight takes c3, which is a really good move because b takes c3 is followed by bishop a3. And look at this poor rook on c1. Typically, one would think like, oh, this is completely over because, well, this rook is not really going anywhere. If it goes to the only square it is not attacked at this moment, to a1, bishop b2 will follow and this rook will be lost anyways. And also bishop takes c3 might be a little bit annoying to deal with. So for that reason, after bishop a3, rook b1 was played, which is insane. Jordan is simply giving away the exchange for what? Why? And you know what? He spent very little time up until this point. It was his preparation. With the white pieces, he went for this line where he's sacrificing the exchange, which is mind-blowing. Let's see how the game continued because you're not ready for what happened after. Bishop takes b1, queen takes b1, rook b8, queen b3, bishop d6. Okay, so these are pretty normal standard moves. Here, white takes on d5, and now after bishop takes f4, of course, you can take on d8 with check and then capture with the pawn on f4, but that ruins your pawn structure, and we all know that you don't want to trade queens, you don't want to trade material when you're down material. And of course, Jordan is down exchange, so he needs the queens on the board. Queen e4 check was played, a very strong move because, well, after black covers the check, then you can take with the queen on f4. So you keep your pawn structure intact. Queen a3 was played, and now again, another check. Knight e7 was played, and here queen c2, because both pawns were under attack by the queen. So this queen covers both. Knight d5, c4, knight c3, c5, and here b6. And it's just crazy what this position is looking like. I mean, what is happening here? This bishop is obviously going to c4, but how is this remotely fine for white? What is going on? Black could simply castle, right? So the thing is that white is gaining so much space, and look at this knight. I just want to take a moment for this knight because it has so little space. I mean, of course you can play knight d5, of course you can go to a4, but I don't see like a nice square for this knight. It's really hard to see where it's heading to. So after bishop c4, b takes c5 was played. Castles, crazy stuff. And after move h5, funnily enough, white is completely fine here, even though there's no pawn on h2 or h3, even remotely close to the king. White king has enough coverage. Those pawns are covering the king very well, and not a single piece is really attacking from black side. There's not a single piece that can approach this white king even. So white is completely fine. And meanwhile, white is attacking with Harry on the h-file. And it's so hard to see what a black can possibly do about this. Look at this bishop sniping here on this diagonal. Look at the queen over here. Knight g5 or knight e5 are in the air. It's very dangerous. And it's in this position that black played the move queen b4, which was a huge mistake. Really hard to see why. What is the difference? Because apparently rook b4 was the only move that could still hold the position and it would still give zeros according to the engine, which is mind-blowing. But after queen b4, the move knight g5, what is played by Jordan, is really annoying to deal with for black. So here's the thing. Of course, the queen is attacking the bishop, but look at what knight g5 is actually doing. Queen takes h7 is a checkmate threat, so you have to deal with that first. And of course, Anish defends it by playing g6, and now queen d3 defending that bishop, and it's so hard to see what can black possibly do. Once again, rook b6, and now Jordan made a small mistake here by taking on c5 and slightly giving away the advantage because, yeah, there was a better move possible, but it's so hard to understand what is going on. Why is this move so bad? And basically throwing the advantage. But apparently the move rook c1, really putting pressure on that knight, would have been very decisive here. Because imagine if the knight simply moves. You know what white can do here? The move queen e4 comes to mind, or even h takes g6. And the issue here is, as you see, the bar is spiking up. The move knight takes f7 is destroying black's position. Of course, it's black to move, but I don't see a move here for black. And knight takes f7 is going to happen regardless. Even if you play rook f6, I mean queen e7, this queen is going to ruin everything for black. So imagine if black plays something else. So instead, let's follow the top move, c takes d4. Queen takes d4 will be played, and just take a moment for this knight once again. This knight doesn't have a lot of squares left. It looks very awkward on c3. Even if it gets to a4, it just doesn't have any prospects. And at the same time, white is crushing it with the move h6, threatening checkmate. At the same time, knight takes f7 is still in the air. It is simply devastating for black. So for that reason, rook c1 was crushing it, but it was missed by Jordan. He played instead the move d takes c5. Rook c6 was played, and after takes. Now the rook is a good defender here on the king side, or is it? f4 was played, and here once again Anish made a major mistake here. Rook g7 was played, and it's once again so hard to see why. I mean, the idea was very straightforward. So of course Anish wants to play h6 here, but the problem is if you play h6, not only are you losing the rook, you're also stepping into a checkmate. So that is not quite ideal, and that's why he wanted to play rook g7 so that he can safely play the move h6, and the rook will not be hanging, his king will be safe, and black should be fine. However, this was once again the moment that Jordan could capture the pawn on f7. Knight takes f7 was a possibility here. He did not play it, but it was definitely destroying black's position here, because after rook takes g7, the move king h2. Don't ask me why. Don't ask me why. The only thing I can tell you is that white is down a rook, still better. This knight on c3 is not that great, of course. It's still an issue. But how is white possibly in a big advantage here when they're down a rook? Well, here's the thing. Bishop takes f7. Of course, you can always recapture that. It is not going to disappear anytime soon. And at the same time, there's moves like rook f3, rook g3, there can be a kingside attack upcoming. Once again, rook c1 comes to mind, maybe even a3 to annoy the queen a little bit. There are so many moves available for white, and for black, barely. Black doesn't have a single activity. I mean, it looks like black has active pieces, but in reality, they cannot achieve anything, and that is simply because of those pieces. The bishop on c4, the queen on d3, they're covering so many squares. For that reason, knight takes f7 would have been a very crucial move to play. However, it is also very risky. It has a high risk, high reward, but in case if things go wrong, Jordan is down a rook here. So I have a feeling that for this reason, he didn't want to take too many risks, and it also seems a little bit unclear here, and this is really engine stuff. So he played the very solid move, rook c1. And after knight a4, he played move knight e4, which is apparently not great at all. Really mind-blowing why. But the problem is that after knight b2, queen b3, the queens are traded, and here it's very difficult for white to achieve, you know, some advantage again, because there are no queens left on the board and black is still up material. So that makes things a little bit harder for white. King h8, rook b1 was played. We're gonna scroll quickly through this endgame. We see the knights are being traded off here. Rook e7, rook b4, making sure that e3 is not going to be captured. Rook d8, king f2, simply bringing the king in the endgame towards the center. A pawn got lost here, but Jordan is going for it with the pawns on the king side. h6 was played, f5, king g7, king f4, rook a3, rook d4, king f6. There we go. Now the pawn on the e file is marching forward, and both players are trying to figure out the best way to place their pieces and make improvements here and there. Here Jordan is avoiding a repetition of moves, plays the move c6. And here we see, yeah, the pieces are simply shuffling around, but at the same time, look at this pawn on the a file. It is advancing all the way to a1. If white is not careful, things might happen here. Rook f8 check. Now the rook goes to a8 safely. a2. f6 is a threat, losing the rook. And look how little mobility this rook has over here. It can literally only go to f7, if you look at it this way. And sooner or later, this rook will get trapped. Of course, after rook f7, immediately bishop d5 will follow, and you can slowly say goodbye to your rook, or you face those pawns marching forward, and yeah, that will be over for black. So he had to look, Anish had to look for a really resourceful move here. And he did. The only move in a position, holding the position and making it possible to, you know, make the best out of it still. Rook e8. And that is simply amazing. Rook a7 was played, and now you can see that this rook has a lot of space, a lot of squares available. It can go to the d file, the b file, and yeah, those files are open. So that's very nice for black. e6 was played, rook f2. Here the players are still trying to make the best out of it. Of course, this rook is tied down to the pawn, as well as this rook, so it's hard to make any sort of progress here for both sides. They're still moving around, and at the same time, Jordan does have the pawn captured now, and an extra pawn on the c file. The pawn a2 got captured, and yeah, this looks pretty scary. This looks pretty scary, but look at what Anish did. Anish allowed Jordan to promote to queen, but look at how vulnerable the king is. Not a single piece can save the king, and that's why rook d2, rook e2, the king cannot escape the checks. And yeah, this would have been possible to continue. The game ended here already, but it would have been possible to even sacrifice the queen. And after rook g6, king h4, rook takes, you could still make a draw from here. But of course, this is not needed at all. And after rook e2, the game ended in a draw. A roller coaster of a game. Chances were mainly for Jordan here. And what a way to, you know, make it very close in this game, because Anish is fighting for the top places. He's fighting for that top prize. And the fact that Jordan could literally ruin his chances is just mind-blowing. Jordan was up around an hour on the clock, and it's just crazy that at the same time, Anish defended so well while being much lower on the clock. You know how intimidating it is to be so low on the clock compared to your opponent? Crazy. But overall, a very fun game to watch. What a spectacular game, and I'm really curious to see how both players will do tomorrow in the final round. Let's continue with our next game. Here we have the game between Magnus Carlsen and Praggnanandhaa. This game was also pretty wild. It started pretty calm, but after that, some interesting things developed. Let's see what happened. Knight of 3 was played on the first move. Here we see the English, and that quickly switched over to the Queen's Gambit. He takes c4, And here once again, Magnus with the isolated queen's pawn. Is he going to keep it? Is he going to trade it? Let's see. So here, this is very interesting. Typically, when you play the move e6, it is strange to see the move g6 being played. However, Praggnanandhaa still goes for it and puts the bishop on g7 instead. It makes sense because this bishop is looking at the pawn on d4, so there's a lot of attack possible on this pawn. But at the same time, now that the pawn is on e6, and with the pawn on g6 as well, bishop g5 is a pretty nice move and placement for that bishop because, well, you're pinning that knight over here, and it's hard to see how this bishop can be kicked away quickly. I mean, of course, h6 is possible, and after that g5, but still, it's pretty, you know, risky to move your pawns like that because they always make some squares nearby vulnerable. Knight e7 was played, and the crazy part here is, by the way, that with the bishop on e4, this knight is pinned once again, so this bishop is perfectly fine on e4. Bishop takes c6 can be pretty annoying because it ruins black's pawn structure, so for that reason, knight e7 was played, and after h4, h6, here we go. Magnus trades off that knight just to make sure that the bishop on e4 stays alive. Queen e2, knight d5. After h5, g5, trying to weaken some squares on the king side. Knight e5 was played, bishop g7, takes. And what is really interesting here is that Magnus sacrificed or pretty much gave away both bishops for the two knights. So it's pretty wild that the world champion is valuing the knights over the bishops here. He values the knights more, and that's rather surprising considering that we know bishops are typically stronger, and you will not really think that it's a close position where knights are really that stronger. But in this situation, Magnus did keep his knights and gave away his bishops pretty much. And when you look at it this way, it makes a lot of sense because the knights are pretty strong. Of course, this knight is really well placed on e5, but this knight on c3 is targeting this pawn on d5, which is a huge weakness. And when you look at black's perspective, those bishops are actually not that great. Of course, you can play bishop f5, but do you see how loose that bishop feels on f5? It can always be attacked, even if it's for g4. For the simple reason that g4 is possible, then the bishop has to retreat, and it doesn't really feel like it has nice squares available, as well as this bishop. The best move that the bishop can currently play is bishop takes, and that is probably not even great because it exposes so many squares on the king side. It really makes his king vulnerable over here, and of course the pawn will also be a huge target. So yeah, it makes actually a lot of sense. Bishop e6 was played, rook e1, short castle, rook e3, bishop f5, and here it goes. So in this position, Magnus played a phenomenal move, queen d1. And you might think, why is he setting up the pieces back in its initial position? Well, here's the thing. So this queen was not really doing much on d2. It was just standing there and really only helping the other pieces to develop. But now that the queen is on d1, look how many squares it has access to. Queen b3 is a possible move where you're attacking the pawn on b7 and the pawn on d5. On top of that, there's also queen f3 possible. Same idea, attacking the bishop, also the pawn on d5. And that means that the queen has access to both sides of the board, the queen side and the king side, which is pretty crazy. This move is multifunctional, and that makes it really hard to deal with that. And in this position, Pragg played the move rook e8, which looks good at first sight, but look at what is possible here for Magnus. Magnus did not play this move, but was able to play the following. Knight takes f7, sacrificing the knight for a huge attack. Because if Praggnanandhaa would have taken here, there was rook f3 possible, and your bishop would definitely disappear at some point. So if you try to defend it with the move queen d7, for example, white could play queen d3, attacking that bishop one more time. And once again, the bishop is pinned, so you cannot capture the queen. So the only way to really defend this bishop now is by playing king f6, the final chance. But here we will simply play g4. You will lose your bishop anyways, and your position looks pretty bad. Even if you just escape with the king, allow the bishop to be captured that easily, your pawn on d5 will be very upset, and yeah, this is simply completely winning for white because, well, white is up a pawn, this pawn on d5 is hanging, and it looks very uncomfortable here for black. However, Magnus did not play knight takes f7. He played the move rook fe1, and that was the one opportunity Magnus had to really make it happen in this game, because after this, Praggnanandhaa really defended well. Bishop e6, knight a4 was played. So in this situation, after queen c7, Magnus still had the opportunity to gain an advantage somehow by not capturing with the knight on b6, but instead with the rook. And that really feels odd because, yeah, the rook, of course, it is very active on b6, and you allow yourself to play queen b3 to activate your pieces even more on the queen side, and you could gain a lot of play here. But it does feel a little loose over here. You could attack the knight, which is the only defender of the rook over here. So a move like bishop d7 may be a bit annoying to deal with. So it doesn't really sit right, this move, but it works. It does work because after bishop d7, you can simply capture that and everything is fine. But Magnus was not having that and played the move knight takes b6 instead. And after this was facing some small problems, causing him to basically trade off some pieces. And after this, yeah, his advantage disappeared. The players went on to play for a long while. And here you may think like, oh, but this knight has a lot of opportunities. Once the knight gets to e4 and then f6, things could change around. But the problem is that this pawn on e5 is so vulnerable that after knight e4 now, you'll simply lose a pawn on e5 and goodbye any sort of attack here. You'll never get to play knight f6 ever. So that's why it is so tricky in this position. It is so hard to see what you can possibly do here. But Magnus found a brilliant move, rook e4. Crazy stuff here, and from here onward it was going absolutely crazy because the thing is, this pawn is pinned, right? Well, pretty much, because after d takes c3, which was indeed played, you can capture this bishop on d7, and it looks like white has a really nice position. You're attacking the rook, e6 is upcoming. However, this pawn is not done just yet. It is going to c2 and has the potential to promote. Magnus captures on e8, king g7, b4. Magnus is not even focusing on this pawn whatsoever. He's allowing Pragg to promote here. Of course, if you promote here, you have to face the consequence that your queen is hanging. But the crazy part about this is that Black doesn't have a single move where he can both save the queen and force the promotion on the next move. Well, technically he could, but there are ways for Magnus to defend in some way. So here there were not a lot of moves possible. And Pragg found pretty much the only move to really not lose here. Queen c3, mind-blowing. Because imagine if you're thinking, okay, my opponent is going to play rook e1, so I want to play a move like queen f2. That will make you lose. First of all, there are moves like e6 hanging in the air. Currently, it is not giving white an advantage, but look at this move, queen c6. Simply stopping the pawn from moving, and after you play a move like queen d2, you can simply think of moves like rook c4, queen f6, e6 even, and you're simply crushing it with this attack. So for that reason, queen f2 is not a great move, but it feels like a logical move, right? Well, queen c3 was played by Pragg, and this was the only move saving the position and still be able to hold it. f4 was followed after this, c1 queen, f5. Magnus is not even caring a single bit about the two queens over there. Magnus allows a promotion of the queen, another queen on the board. Queen c7 was played, another move that was pretty difficult to find because after f6, king h7, Magnus plays queen f8. Some people may just resign here because queen g7 is forced checkmate, one might think. However, Pragg saw all of this happen and came up with the move queen takes e5, which was insane. He played a brilliant move here as well, and the reason why he's giving up the queen is because after rook takes e5, queen f4 check. King g1, and Pragg has the repetition. King f2, queen f4. If Magnus goes back to g1, it will simply be a repetition, which is why he's going to the e file, where he's met with queen takes e5 check. The queen captures the rook with check, and after that it captures the pawn on f6, so there's no more checkmate whatsoever. The players keep going because, well, it's a queen endgame. Anything can happen in a queen endgame. If there's one endgame that is super hard to calculate, it's a queen endgame, because the queens have so many squares available. Here, Pragg goes for the move king g8, and it might be interesting to note that a move like queen f6 is probably one of the very few ways to lose here, because you may think like, oh, trading queens, that could simplify things, and you know, maybe we have some chances here with the black pieces when the trade of queens happens. But after queen takes, king takes, there's moves like a4. You can create a passed pawn, and this passed pawn will be so far away for the king here. So the reason why this is winning, of course the king can catch up, right? But the idea is that after takes, this king goes here, and then, okay, I'm not making the most precise moves here, but just to illustrate, this king will go to the king side and capture all the pawns over here, while black will have to focus on capturing this pawn, which will take some time. So that's why after queen f6, you're simply losing. So that's why king g8 was played, not really attempting to trade the queens just yet. Queen b8, king g7, and they're just playing around a little bit. Pragg took a pawn on h5. He is also going to capture the pawn on g2. There we go. And Magnus is literally down 2 pawns, but he's still fighting. He's still smelling blood and really trying to play until there's like 2 bare kings left, or there's nothing else he can do anymore. B takes a6. He's still going for it. Queen a8, the only move, because the threat is queen d8 check, threatening to promote. So king d6 now. I mean, where is this king even going to? And look at this pawn on g2. It is also going to promote soon if white is not careful. King e5, queen f3, queen d8, king h7. There's another queen on the board. And here we see a trade of queens. Another queen on the board. I've seen so many queens in this game. It's madness. King d3, queen d1, king e3, queen e1. And this was the moment that Magnus decided, okay, it's done. It's a draw, because Magnus cannot escape the checks. For the simple reason that there's a queen on a8, and the queen cannot shield whatsoever. It can attempt to shield the king, but if you try to do that, you may possibly simply lose that. So it's probably not a good idea to even try to continue here. Funnily enough, the live feed shows a move king e4, which is literally the only way to lose here because of queen h1. But of course, this is because the players put the kings in the center to show that the game ended in the draw. They put the kings on e4 and e5, which depicts a draw. But yeah, the system still showed the move king e4, which is pretty funny. All right. Pretty crazy game between Magnus and Pragg. This is pretty devastating for Magnus, because he was on his way to, you know, maybe have a chance to win the whole tournament. But now he's still a point behind the leader, Nutterback. So pretty much a miracle must happen for Magnus to have a chance once again. Will he be able to make it happen? We'll have to see tomorrow, but he will definitely not be happy with today's result, as he definitely had some good chances to gain an advantage and perhaps even win the game. One final game I want to take a look at is from the challengers between Thomas Beerdsen and Alexander Donchenko. Alexander Donchenko has been leading throughout the event pretty much, and this game would make the difference between him already winning, or, you know, he may have to fight for another day tomorrow. So in this game, it's also very important for Thomas Beerdsen, because apparently he is 1 point missing for the GM norm. If he wins one more game, or if he scores 2 draws in the last 2 rounds, he will have the Grandmaster norm, his final one, and also the Grandmaster title. Will he be able to win this game, hold it to a draw, or is Alexander Donchenko going to take the lead, win the game, and, you know, absolutely win this tournament? Let's find out. So here, e4, c6, d4, d5, e5. So this is the Caro-Kann, and here Thomas went for the advanced variation. Bishop f5, h4, which is the Tal variation. This variation can get pretty sharp. I love using this line myself because it gets pretty crazy. And if black is not careful or doesn't know how to play, there are some nasty lines in this variation. h5, c4, and e6, knight c3. Here, black captures on c4, and it looks a little bit odd because it feels like you're giving away the center here with the black pieces. But the reason why black takes on c4 is because this square will be used for a different piece. This knight wants to go there. Let's go. Knight d7, knight g2, bishop e7, g3, knight h6, bishop f4, queen f b6. They're all very standard, normal developing moves. The knight decided to not go to d5 just yet, but there's no rush really, because who else is going to control the d5 square? Doesn't really feel like black has any problems there and that white has a chance to control it somehow. I mean, d5 will simply be captured, right? So there's no problem there. Short castle was played, rook d8, queen c1, of course defending that pawn at some point on b2, a6, and here it was in this position that Thomas made a very crucial mistake. It really feels like nothing can go wrong here. It feels like it's just the start of the game, but he went for the move bishop e3, which was the move that caused a lot of trouble for him. c5 was played by Alexander Donchenko, and after rook d1, knight g4, and look at this poor bishop on e3. I mean, it doesn't really feel like something's really wrong just yet, but look how Alexander Donchenko played here. Bishop b3, short castle, d takes c5, bishop takes c5. Okay, seems still fine, right? Knight a4. Well, here's the thing. Of course, there's a lot of pressure on this bishop, so you need to think of something really crazy and like creative things. And yeah, if you step out of the way, then of course bishop takes f2, and that doesn't feel right at all. If you take on c5, which looks logical at first sight, after queen takes c5, of course queen takes f2 is under attack, but there's another issue. Look at this poor pawn on e5. After the move queen f4, defending that pawn, there's knight d takes e5, and there are simply a lot of problems in white's position. Knight is entering on d3, also attacking the pawn on f2, and there are simply not enough pieces on white's side to defend the position. White's position is falling apart. That's why Thomas still tried to go for a wild position with knight a4, but Alexander really calculate this through, and bishop takes e3 was played by him after knight takes b6, simply not caring that the queen is being captured. Of course, he's taking the queen back, and after knight takes d7, bishop takes, the knight captures the rook, rook takes, knight d4, bishop g6, rook ac1, and knight takes e5. And this was enough reason for Thomas to resign, because the problem is that not only is the bishop attacking the rook over here, it was already crazy that he played the move rook ac1, but didn't really have much else to do. But the problem is that not only that, bishop takes d4 is also a threat. Imagine anything happens, and for example, rook c7 is being played, bishop takes d4, and after rook takes d4, knight f3 check, forking the rook and the king. So black will simply be up a lot of material here. And that's why after knight takes e5, Thomas resigned here. It may have been a little bit early, but the position looks pretty hopeless. White could still have tried with something like knight takes e6, but yeah, it just doesn't look great whatsoever. And it looks like white is simply losing too much material. So unfortunately for Thomas, he still needs to try tomorrow to gain his final Grandmaster norm. He needs to win his game. So let's find out in the last round if Thomas Beerdsen can manage to clinch that Grandmaster norm. But what we know so far is that Alexander Donchenko has officially won the challengers of the Tata Steel Chess Tournament, which means that not only, I mean, of course, it's really nice to win the tournament, but he's also going to advance to the Masters next year. He is qualified for the Masters. So congratulations to Alexander Donchenko for winning the challengers. He will move on to the Masters in the next year. and I'm really looking forward to see him play there. So that was the last game of this video. Let me know what you thought of the video in the comments. I hope you liked it. Make sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel, and I hope to see you tomorrow in the final round of the Tata Steel Chess Tournament.